Hi, my name's Nick. I'm a gardener based in Renmore here in Galway. I've been doing a series of videos on growing tomatoes from seed. So these were planted the 16th of February, and then they were transplanted from effectively a seed pot to these pots on the 13th of March. And we're now about 15th of April, and I want to discuss a few issues with them. So these ones seem kind of okay. These are Tom's Organic Sweeties, organic sweeties, and they're big enough to transplant. And I would be a little concerned when they start to get a little bit leafy like this, that if we get strong sun, the leaves are taking quite a bit of moisture from the compost, and they might be drying out quite quickly in a small pot like this. Now, what I wanted to mention is that we had three other varieties, either 3 or 4 other varieties of tomato. These are some of the other ones. That's an Alicante, that's the biggest Alicante. That's a money maker, and that's a sweet baby. So there's 3 other types. You can see they're doing very poorly. Even these big ones, the leaves are kind of yellowed. I think that can be called chlorosis, when the chlorophyll's not operating properly, and can be a lack of iron actually in the soil. Tomatoes are very tough, so usually, other than they can get a bit of sunburn from being on the windowsill, which they usually tolerate fairly well. Usually they're pretty good, but I mean, these little ones have like leaves dying back, and even the big ones here have these very yellow leaves, which I know will just drop off. So I'm not quite sure what's wrong with them. It's very unusual. We had a bad year last year, but that was for completely unrelated reasons. I've always found with tomatoes, you plant the seeds, you transplant them, they're very tough, and I'm fairly gentle with them anyway. The only thing that's different from previous years is I bought this seed and cutting compost just because it was a small bag and it was more convenient to carry that than my usual huge bag compost. So what I have here is I have my huge bag of compost. There comes from Woodies, 2 for 12 quid when they have them in stock, and that's what I usually use in all previous years for potting, right from seedling as well. So I'm going to transplant some of these into there. One of the things I've kind of noticed this year as well is that it's been fairly cold, so the issues might be about it just not being warm enough. So they're warm and sunny on the windowsill, and I don't move them every night because that would take too long. I have about 30 pots on the windowsill, so maybe at night it's getting cold again on that windowsill, and the plants do most of the growing actually at night. They take the energy in from the sun during the day and they grow at night. So if the pot is cold and the roots are cold, it might be that at night they're not really processing all that energy properly. I'm not sure, I'm really not sure. But one of the issues quite possibly is the compost drying out quickly. Now compost, if you let the pot dry out completely, so sometimes if you have a big potted plant or something and it dries out completely, when you pick it up you're almost surprised at how light it is with all that compost in there. Compost has this ability that obviously it absorbs moisture. Now if you let compost dry out completely, I learned this while studying horticulture. Wow, that's light. It's hydrophobic, so if it dries out completely and then you water it, what will happen is the water will just run through the compost and drip out the bottom. So once it's dried out completely, it doesn't want to reabsorb moisture. So if you have small pots on the windowsill and they get too dry, it's really hard to gauge, because I thought on some days I was watering them too much, in that I watered them once every day and that was too much for them. So then I didn't water them for a few days and they seemed to do a little better. But now again, the pots are all very light and dry. So I'm transplanting them to deeper pots like this. So they're much less likely, I wouldn't have done this originally because the pots were just simply too big, but they're much less likely to dry out. And I usually do transplant to pots this size anyway, but I wouldn't transplant from a tiny little tomato like that, because there's no point in doing that yet. This is just about the size where you'd probably transplant them. And so I'll show you with just one. This is half full of compost. I might actually use, I've got a couple of slightly bigger ones as well, so you see I've got this one and this one, so I might use one of these just to the very biggest one, which is also half full of compost. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this nice big one and take the lower leaves off. This is a trick I came across on the web, and I have to say it really works. It looks like I'm doing all the lovely work of the plant here. If you break the leaves off, I'd suggest pinching them off. Usually tomatoes, you can snap them by snapping the plant upwards like that, and then downwards, and they should come off cleanly. Now you see that hasn't. That's exactly what I didn't want. And I think it's because they're so young, they don't have that brittleness yet. What you don't want to do is just snap the leaf down, because it tends to tear the fabric down the stem, and then you're left with a wound that can get infected quite easily. And for this particular purpose, you don't want that. So why I'm doing this is, you probably can't see, I'll see if I can show you. There's lots of tiny hairs on the stem here. They go all the way up, but they're a little less thick as you go up. And what will happen is, if you take this tomato and you bury it, we'll say up to here in compost, all of this area will produce fresh roots. So you've got roots here at the bottom, then you'll have roots going up stem to here, and then it will just grow out of the soil as normal. And when you pot it on again, now I'll only pot them once more after this into 10-litre buckets or something of that size. When you pot it on, you'll pull it out and you'll actually see two separate sets of roots. So it really does work, that it doubles the amount of rooting going on. And obviously if there's more root, there's more ability to absorb moisture and nutrients. So when you get to the point where it's producing tomatoes, it has the ability to either produce more tomatoes or produce bigger tomatoes, juicier tomatoes, who knows, but it seems to work anyway. So if you take it from this little pot like this and you just transplant it on top of some soil, the roots will come down a little bit, but they're not going to come all the way down to the bottom of the pot, because they're sitting in the top layer of soil, so they're not encouraged to do that. If you put that in this pot and it's like that, the roots will be encouraged to come, you know, up to here. They'll just grow out from the side of the stem. So we'll do this now. These are all soaked last night. As I said, the compost is dried out, appears to be dried out quite badly, and they don't take the moisture in all that well. I can see that the paper is still wet on this one from soaking it last night. Now importantly, this is a mistake that was made in the previous year. If you put newspaper in the bottom of your pot to stop them dropping the compost everywhere, as I do, carefully peel that back off, because if you leave that in, it actually acts like quite a good barrier to stop the roots going through, which is also good, because when they're in the pot you'd have all the roots coming out the bottom, and then when you try to transplant it to another pot, you often see that when you buy plants from nurseries and the like, all the roots are sticking out the bottom. You pretty much have to rip them through the pot to get them out. I usually just snip them off in that case. So you should be able to see all the roots are, you know, all the way through that soil. So I've got my other pot here. I might actually take a little bit of that compost back out so I can put this deeper in the pot, as I had planned. And now I'm going to put that in quite low down, like so. And put that compost back in. Now I was saying that they're quite robust and sturdy, and you know, so I normally wouldn't worry too much about the roots being disturbed. And in some cases, I've taken them out of the pot of when the compost has been nice and wet, and I've taken them out almost just the plant with the roots on, and dug a hole in the pot, as I did with the first transplant, and gently put the plant all the way down, put the soil around it, the compost around it, watered it, and then just left it to reattach itself to the soil and stand up overnight. But because they generally haven't done so well this year, I've decided that I'll just take them in their the old compost they have, gently put them in the pot, and obviously make sure there's a layer of compost, fresh compost underneath, and a lot of compost, fresh compost on top, and then re-soak them so that they're disturbed as little as possible. As I said, I'm not entirely sure why they haven't done so well. I mean, these probably, on the video, they look quite nice and big, but really I've brought these in as a sample. I've got 5 of this type, 5 of this type, and 5 of this type, and they're all like this or smaller. And then I've got 5 of this type, which this is the biggest one, and you can see they're just like huge by comparison. So they've done quite well. I would say with the cold is really the problem, and the other ones haven't. So now we just fill this up like so. And remember what I said about not pounding the compost down. What you'll also find, I wouldn't over mound the pot, but what you'll find is when you're putting water in here over a period of a few days, if you're watering it, is that the compost level will sink down. It's kind of, when it takes the moisture in, the weight of the water helps kind of compact the compost to a certain degree anyway, so you'll probably be able to top that up. And what I'm going to do is, I've got this nice big pot here, full of half full brass pot, half full of water, and I'm going to sit this in the pot to absorb moisture that way, if it will allow that. Sometimes what will happen is the compost will just start floating up in the pot. It's probably slightly too much water in there, so it won't stand upright. We'll see how it does. Yeah, and I'll water that from the top as well. What I noticed last night was I left one of my pots in that had dried out completely for the night. It dried out completely and left it for the night. There's a little bit of water dripping at the bottom, and it did actually rehydrate. I can feel the pot's nice and heavy. Some of that water will drain off. I just leave it out on a concrete surface for an hour or so for the excess to drain off. So it did rehydrate this way, but when I just kind of put them in the pot in this water bucket for a few minutes, they took a little bit of water in, and then when I lifted them out, it pretty much all poured out the bottom. So you can really see that the compost struggled to take in and keep the moisture. And if you imagine tipping water from your can, like this one, from the top onto that dry compost, which is now kind of hydrophobic, most of it's just coming out the bottom. And you can normally tell, because if you've nice fresh compost and you tip a little bit of water in, it'll go in the top, and if you've overwatered, after a minute or two, a few drops start coming out the bottom. But with this now, if I tip this in the top, it'll more or less instantly come straight back out the bottom. So it shows you the compost is dried out and that the water just travels straight through it and out the bottom. Well, the plant's not going to do very well there. So the last thing I wanted to mention, I'll do the rest of these in my own time, is that this issue of the transplanting. So these are Alicante tomatoes, okay? This was the original pot that they were in, and I took the ones that I wanted out of this pot and I just left the spares in here. These were the scrawny ones that I was going to give away to people. Now what you'll notice is, I think that's an Alicante, yeah. So I think that's my biggest Alicante that was transplanted. What you'll notice is that in the original pot, undisturbed, they've done much better than the disturbed one. That's not usually what happens. What usually happens is you put them in a pot by themselves, they don't have any competition for nutrients, their roots get spread out to the full width of the pot, and they're very happy and they suddenly start growing very quickly. So in this case, the untransplanted ones have done much better. They're more like these organic tomatoes, probably slightly thicker even. So what I'm going to do, and you might think, well, if they're doing well, leave them alone. But the problem is, if I don't separate them out, I'll end up having to pinch 2 of those out and have only one good plant left. And that's okay because they're spares, but if these other Alicantes continue not to do well, I might have a problem in that they may just have a very bad season. I might end up with no tomatoes. So I think I'm going to take a risk. I'm going to separate these out. There's a small one here I'm not concerned about. If I manage to get 2, and I'll probably actually just pinch that out, if I manage to get 2 Alicantes from here, I'll be happy with that. So I think what I'll do is, because I need to separate out the roots, rather than just chopping the pot in 2, which means all of the roots on the inside of both of these will be cut through, I might actually soak this pot gently separate out the tomatoes so they come out with a full strand of roots on, and then repot them in a deeper pot. The only other thing to note is these are chili peppers. These were just bought chilies. I kept a few seeds and planted them. I have another one here which is doing terribly badly. Originally it was doing quite well. Just I can't really see what's wrong with it. It's not in direct sun. They don't like direct sun. The compost dries out very quickly in there, and it's not very deep. With chilies, it's important to note that I read a couple of years ago, when you're growing them, it's best not to grow them in a big depth of soil, because if you grow them in too much soil, what happens is they concentrate on producing roots, when what you want is for them to produce above ground foliage. So you tend to plant them in quite shallow pots, and then when they're nice and big, you can transplant them to something a bit deeper, just to make sure they don't dry out. As I said, with this is a nice kind of wide pot for a single chili, so theoretically it should do quite well, but that compost is just dried out, persistently dried out very quickly. So I'm going to transplant those as well, not into a deep pot, but just into a different pot with some fresh compost, and we'll see how we go. Thank you.